Imagine a man standing over 6 feet tall, with a presence so commanding that when he entered a room, the air seemed to grow still. To history, he is the marble statue, the father of his country, a man of frozen, unshakable dignity. But if you could step back in time and look into his eyes during a moment of betrayal or incompetence, you would see something terrifying. You would see a volcano behind the calm mask of George Washington was a legendary, explosive temper, a fire so hot that it could wither the strongest men. George Washington was not born a Stoic. He was born with a volcanic spirit. His greatest victory was not over the British Empire at Yorktown, but over the chaotic forces of his own heart. He understood a truth that many of us struggle with today, that a man who cannot rule his own emotions can never hope to rule anything else. His life is a masterclass in mastery, showing us that our greatest weaknesses can be transformed into our greatest strengths through discipline and silence. As a young man, Washington was ambitious, thin-skinned, and quick to take offense. He knew his anger was a liability, a crack in his armor that his enemies could exploit. To counter this, he turned to a set of 110 rules of civility that he copied by hand as a teenager. These weren't just etiquette rules. They were a blueprint for self-regulation. He practiced the art of the pause. When his blood began to boil, he would force himself into a state of silence until the rational mind could regain control. He realized that anger is a form of temporary madness, and that to act in anger is to surrender your sovereignty. During the Revolutionary War, Washington's stoicism was tested to its breaking point. He led an army that was often starving, unpaid, and barefoot. He dealt with a Congress that was indecisive and generals who plotted behind his back. At the Battle of Monmouth, when he discovered General Charles Lee retreating in cowardice, Washington's temper finally broke. Witnesses said the trees seemed to shake from the power of his fury. But even then, he channeled that internal fire not into a personal attack, but into a rallying cry that turned a retreat into a standoff. He learned that energy, when disciplined, becomes authority. The most profound moment of his mastery occurred at the end of the war, in what is known as the Newburgh Conspiracy. His officers, frustrated by the government's failure to pay them, were on the verge of a military coup. They wanted Washington to lead them as a king. The fate of the American experiment hung by a thread. Washington walked into a room filled with angry armed men. He could have lashed out at their disloyalty, or he could have seized power for himself. Instead, he practiced humility. He began to read a letter, but he stumbled over the words. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pair of spectacles, something most of his men had never seen him wear. He said softly, "Gentlemen, you will permit me to put on my spectacles, for I have not only grown gray but almost blind in the service of my country." In that single moment of vulnerability, the anger in the room vanished. The officers wept by mastering his own ego and choosing graces over force. Washington saved the nation. He proved that true power is the ability to influence others through your character, not your temper. Washington practiced what the Stoics called the inner citadel. He believed that while we cannot control the external world, the weather, the politics, the betrayals, we have total control over our internal response. He once wrote that the foolish and wicked practice of profane cursing and swearing is a vice so mean and low that every person of sense and character detests it. To him, losing one's temper was a sign of a small mind. To be great meant to be a master of one's own impulses. In our modern world, we are constantly invited to be angry. The digital world is designed to trigger our outrage. We feel justified in our fury, believing that the louder we shout, the more powerful we are. But Washington's life tells a different story. It tells us that the man who shouts is the man who has lost the battle. The silence of George Washington was his greatest weapon. It gave him the space to think, the strength to endure, and the dignity to lead. To find your own control today, you must identify your triggers. What makes your volcano erupt? Is it a comment on social media? A mistake by a coworker? A disappointment in your personal life? When you feel that heat rising, remember the spectacles of George Washington. Practice the pause. Understand that your anger is an internal event that you can choose to de-escalate. You are the commander of your own soul. Do not give away your sovereignty to a fleeting emotion. Take a deep breath. Realize that mastery is a daily practice. You will not always be perfect, just as Washington was not always perfect. But every time you choose silence over a sharp word, every time you choose patience over a quick temper, you are building your own inner citadel. You are moving from the state of a victim to the state of a sovereign. As you move through your day, carry the tranquility of the Stoic general with you. Know that your character is built in the moments when you want to scream, but choose to breathe instead. You have a fire inside you, but you must be the one who controls the flame. Be the master of your temper, and you will be the master of your life. Stand tall, stay calm, and rule your own heart.